Dad arrived in the hospital shortly before. If you've got to leave, like, I'll understand. My battery might die before I get through this. Dad arrived in the hospice shortly before the 18th of December ticked over into the 19th. He'd been raised a Christian, however, and throughout his ill health, much disturbed by the terror and persecution, genocide and atrocities happening across the globe, he had decided that there just couldn't be a God. And by the time I got to the hospice on the morning of the 19th, he said that the kindness and compassion he had been shown by the hospice staff since his arrival had restored his faith in God. Excuse my sniffs, I haven't got any tissues with me. I asked if he wanted me to arrange for my in-laws to come and pray with him, and for the hospice minister to visit too. He did, and so we did. My in-laws brought with them a wonderfully tactile, smooth carved wooden cross. I'd never seen anything quite like it before, but it was the perfect size to clasp in a fist. And there it stayed in his hand until the very end. I was very grateful for the comfort he was able to take from it, but I'm getting ahead of myself though. I recall the 19th of December being a pretty good day. Dad seemed to have perked right up and was awake for what seemed like most of the day. He did tell me he was scared about being on his own though, and so I promised that he wouldn't be. We were careful to stagger canteen and toilet trips among us so that he didn't have to be alone. It lulled me into a total false sense of optimism with just how well he was that day. Some of Mum and Dad's long-term friends also wanted to visit, as did Dad's brother, so it wasn't a quiet hospice room by any means. It was so close to Christmas, and as any parent can tell you, December means a seemingly endless list of school dates for performances and come and share sessions. One was scheduled for that very afternoon. I felt like I was weighing up spending more time with my dad or racing to be with my eldest son. Dad wanted me to go and be at school, and so off I went. I recall it being a hectic and rushed goodbye with the promise that I would see him bright and early tomorrow. He seemed so well compared to how he'd been for the week or so before he got to the hospice. So about 50 minutes later, I was sitting in a tiny chair, sticking glitter to a snowman with a dried up Pritt stick. I was trying to adjust my mental state from terminal hospice mode to joyful time with a room full of 4-year-olds mode, and it wasn't easy. It was almost 3 years later, when I was back in that very same chair, in that very same classroom for my youngest child's first day of school, that I realised I'd made the wrong decision. I should have chosen longer with my dad. My eldest might have been disappointed that day if Mummy didn't show up, but I could have asked my now very dear friend Lindsay to spend some time with my son in my absence, and within a few days he wouldn't have remembered. I still remember. And imagine the minutes and hours I missed with Dad, and it hurts my heart and burns my eyes. Mum stayed at the hospice with him that night, for what turned out to be their last night together, after 42 years of marriage. I got to the hospice the following morning. Mum said 10 minutes before I had arrived. Dad had been very agitated. Look at me soothing myself with a little scratch to the head. It has a name, apparently. Terminal agitation. So, you know, there's a cheery fact for you. And in response to this agitation, they'd put him to sleep. I'm kind of grateful that I didn't have to see him suffer like that, but also gutted that I missed saying a mindful and conscious goodbye by a measly 10 minutes. Believe me when I say that I've replayed that morning to see how I could have gained an extra 15 minutes back to get there sooner. But the fact remains I didn't know and I couldn't have done. He had been so well the day before, which had lulled me into thinking that maybe we still had longer together than we did. Maybe he was also imagining that I'd go all home and away on him, so me missing the goodbye was for the best. If you don't know, if you missed the beginning bit, there's a bit about home and away earlier in the book, so watch on replay and it will all become clear. The day that he died, it was just my mum, me, and my brother and his fiancée. That they'd recently got engaged in New York and shared a little secret with Dad. They were expecting their second child, except for Dad forgot it was a secret and told everyone. Still, I'm glad that Dad knew about baby and that the grandchild he would never meet was in the room with him when he passed. That very baby ended up being a boy and is named after my dad, which was just the loveliest thing. They're now also expecting their third child, so the family continues to grow. I'm so grateful for my sister-in-law for being there, not only for her emotional support at the time and since, because it seemed, to me anyway, significant. We'd all spent the day there with Dad, doing our little relay if we needed to pop to the toilets or the cafe, to ensure that Dad was never alone. I won't go into the details of his death. Safe to say, I recall it being very peaceful, and I was so massively grateful that my worst fear hadn't come true. Not only was I there with him, holding his hand, but my mum and my brother and his fiancée, now wife, were there too. My husband was home putting our kids to bed, and I'm incredibly grateful for him for that too. I was breastfeeding at the time, and I was so worried about being away from my youngest, and I didn't want him being distressed at bedtime in the arms of hurriedly assembled babysitters who wouldn't know the bedtime routine. It seemed kinder to allow him to be distressed in his daddy's arms than wonder where both of his parents were. The hospice staff at Daintree were just wonderful. I shall be forever grateful and thankful for their kindness, compassion, and discretion. Pretty soon after Dad died, I just felt like I wanted to go home though. I just didn't feel his connection or his presence in the room anymore. It might have looked like we all made a mass exodus from the room shortly after, and perhaps we did. He didn't look like Dad to me though. He'd become so thin in the latter stages of his illness that even my iPhone stopped recognizing him in photos. So I said I was going to go, and I wouldn't see him. Wish I had. I'd see Mum and my brother for lunch tomorrow. I got into the car park and went to start my car engine, and an alert light flashed on. Warning, fuel level is too low. I couldn't believe it. All those visiting miles seemed to have caught up with me. The irony also wasn't lost on me that the person I usually would have called for technical advice with my car in the event of a breakdown had just died. Similarly to that, my mum's boiler packed up a couple of days after he died. Dad had been a boilerman since before I was born. You couldn't make this stuff up. Luckily, I managed to start my car, and so it was within an hour of my dad dying, I found myself filling up my car with diesel. So much had changed that day, and already I was having to play by the rules of life, a life which already seemed tilted off axis. Let's have another drink, see if there's any questions, if anyone's even watching. Not that it's about that, is it? Give me a wave if you're here, guys. Oh, we've got quite the gathering. This can't be as bad as I imagined it to be. You having a nice time? You gonna come again? Let me just see on my other page. Feel free to ask any questions, guys, and I will answer when I can. Anyone on here? Oh, my battery's running low. Oh no, carnage. Okay, right. Still there? You watch me vainly see that anyone's watching. Just, this is quite a public thing to do. You'd like to think that someone was here in spirit. So thank you for watching, guys. My dad died on the 20th of December 2017, which is exactly 3 years ago today. Ever the considerate person, he was careful to pass after his birthday, but before Christmas, and at the thoroughly decent time of 6:20 p.m. What I craved most after his passing was time. Time to myself. Time to lay in bed and grieve and to work out who I was without my dad. However, it was the Christmas holidays, and so what I got was an 18-month-old and a 4-year-old around all of the time. It really wasn't an easy time at all. I know it can't have been an easy time for my husband or my children either. Suddenly, the usually carefree and optimistic mummy and wife they were used to knowing was sitting with tears sliding down her face for what seemed like a really long time, and with little to no notice. My youngest child was also waking 3 to 4 times a night at this stage, and still liked to get up for the day at 6 a.m. or earlier, so I was exhausted. And what I've learned is that grief needs sleep in order to stand a chance of healing. In fact, in terms of ability to process and recover from trauma, sleep is essential. Sleep. We had his funeral in the January, and I'm so thankful for that day. I recall it with bittersweet emotion. The church was packed with hundreds of people. Everyone loved Norman. I gave a eulogy at the church service, and whilst it was emotional, I'm so pleased I was able to do this. Many of my friends came, those who had known Dad growing up, but also some who had never met him. One of my fondest memories is giving my friend a big hug after he'd driven from Essex to Milton Keynes to come to the funeral just so he could support me. I won't lie, I also liked the buffet at the wake, and Dad would have loved it too.